Live at Oklahoma Shakedown.
I can't hear you.
I think that's one thing we'd like.
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma City and attended the University of Oklahoma for my undergrad and graduate. And when I went back for my master's, I needed to find a project to really show everything that I've done. And this issue is becoming a larger and larger issue, and you're hearing more about it. And so I decided to take my girlfriend on a romantic weekend of all the small towns in Oklahoma, the best hotels, and actually start talking to these people out there that were being affected. And by the end of that trip, I was not only interested but angry in what I saw. These people in these small towns, they're the ones that are truly being affected. I mean, let's be honest, people really started hearing about it when Oklahoma City and people in Edmond were getting hit. But it's these people in small towns that feel like they have no voice to stand up and say something about this, and they're the ones that are seeing the real property damage. And that's what I really want to try to get out there about this film.
I don't think that many people understand that you'll hear a 4 occurred, a 3-6, and no damages. We have documentation. June 26th, the Guthrie area, 52 quakes were documented by a student studying this at OSU and a community who saw the damages. And most of them, there was 1 or 2 stronger, like a 4 or a strong 3, but many of them are just 3s, middle 3s, destroying homes. There are people that have had $104,000 worth of damage on a $120,000 home. It took 7 months to repair. That person was fortunate they had insurance that covered it. Right now, most are not getting any real help from coverage, or they're like my friend Jackie in Coyle, Oklahoma, who is living in an unsafe home and has no insurance and no real needs. And so, unfortunately, this has hit a lot of people very hard, and we're not hearing about it. Many people are having damages and repairing them, and they're not sharing that information. So a lot of the whole state don't understand what some are going through and why so many of us become so vocal.
And a lot of people in these small towns, they don't want to speak out against their neighbors. You're looking at these small towns of 600, maybe 2,000 people. Nobody wants to be the reason why, the person down the street is making $2 million a year now. So no one wants to speak about this. It's not everybody benefiting from this. And that's an important thing to remember when you see commercials on TVs that talk about, the farmers that are benefiting from this, and that helps farmers. It's helping those farmers that you're seeing on TV. Those are ones that are being given a voice by the energy industry to continue their own. Think about the ones that can't afford these high production, TV commercials. Those are the ones that are being affected by this and having their farms contaminated.
We had a rash of earthquakes in January this year, and the Corporation Commission asked, and I guess the oil companies cooperated in reducing their injection rates. Have you noticed a sizable decrease in seismic activity in that period of time?
I actually talked about this.
Everybody hear his question? I'm sorry.
Right. What he's asking is that after January, when we saw a large rash, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission really worked with them to reduce how much was being injected. And the truth is they did see a decrease, but here's what that decrease was. Last year we had about between 907, plus 3 earthquakes by the end of the year, about a little over 950. And 4 months in, we've had 250. So we're seeing about 10% or 10 less on the pace overall of the whole year. So technically, there's been a decrease, very technically. So
We're actually at 286 plus 3s for the year, and the access I have with the seismometer and the students studying this is starting to see real time from about March 14th, when the indictments and actually Audrey McClendon's death was somehow signed the date that they're pinning, that we're starting to see a real decrease. What is alarming or concerning is we have production going down so much. How much is that going to play a factor? What about if they're not going to inject? They're going to recycle this on food. People, they're right now passing a bill at the legislature to recycle this water on our crops and have a study on how. There's a lot of issues with that, and they're really trying to figure out what are they going to do, because when the price goes back up and they start drilling. Today I spent an hour in front of a well at 19th and Jardo, just outside the city of Stillwater city limits. The flare running there was so nasty, I ended up with a headache, literally went home and showered to get the smell off of my body, just to do an interview. And for someone that's working on a project. And so there's a bigger aspect than just the earthquakes. And so I would really say you need to be engaged in understanding what are they going to do with this produced water? And what else is happening to our environment? Dakota's studying this. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit of the horrors, because we're just talking earthquakes too often when we need to be talking about our air and our water.
So one of the things that came up in the film when we were working with the Stillwater City Council was looking at all the data out of the Marcellus Shale, all of the data out of the Barnett down in Texas, all of the data out of the Bakken up in North Dakota. And one of the reasons that we were pushing for a 2,500 foot setback was because they've noticed a lot of really interesting I think is an unusual word to use for it, but interesting health problems coming out of people who are living less than 2,500 feet to these wells. One of the things that they're coming across is that there's a lot of methane leaking from these wells, and that's impacting a lot of different things, whether it be birth rates, whether it be birth defects, whether it be the birth weights that babies are at when they're born. They're having a lot of really unusual cancers popping up in the Marcellus area, the Barnett area, as well as the Bakken area. And so there's a lot of really problematic health issues that are popping up out of these areas that we haven't had time to figure out exactly what of the 1,000 chemicals that go into this fracking water are causing these issues. Is it the methane? Is it those chemicals? And if it is one or the other, then how do we prevent that from happening? And part of the problem with the way that the economy is working right now is we have such a rash to frack that we're not giving people enough time to study those problems and figure out what we can do to make them not happen. And so that's another thing to be thinking about. It's not just the earthquakes, like Angela said, it's methane that's in the air. You can't control that, especially in places windy as Oklahoma. There's also a lot of water contamination that's happening. There are some really problematic studies, especially coming out of Marcellus with fish and amphibious creatures, whether they be frogs or what have you, downstream from fracking sites. They're having lots of deformities and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are happening. If you want to know any more about any of those sorts of things that are particularly interesting, you can hit me up afterwards and I can send you some of that information. But there's a lot of problems with this that we're not taking the time to look at because we're in such a rush to make as much money as we can hand over for this work as some of us are.
Yeah, it's much bigger than just the earthquakes. I chose to focus just on that, but everybody brought up the problems with this groundwater contamination, things like that, and that's just a whole other documentary in itself that touching on it in this wouldn't have done it justice. So,
and earthquakes is what's got people in Oklahoma talking, right? As Angela said in the film, our state has a problem with science, so the thing you can start with is the earthquakes, right?
Is there another question?
I know there are a lot of hills with the oil and gas industry, but if we just focus on the quaking stuff, we talked about the reduction in injection rates, I guess, in March that occurred, and whether or not that's affecting anything. And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't studied the issue much. But if we did reduce the level of earthquakes, is there applied some insurance procedure to pay people for damages? Is that something that you would see as a partial solution to at least the shaking part?
Well, there's damage been done already. That's one problem you have to look at. We were talking about earthquake insurance. That's where I think some benefits can be done right now, is placing some sort of liability on some entity or just having that paid for. Because it's not that expensive for earthquake insurance, but Oklahoma shouldn't be paying that. The industry brings jobs to this state. And I've said this before, but if Walmart brought jobs to your small town and just every once in a while started a trash fire, you wouldn't stand around and just be willingly to pay extra fire insurance. There has to be liability taken for these quakes and the damages they've caused and can continue to cause. So it's not just stopping them now, but this problem has already been created, and that needs to be fixed. And I'm not an economist. I'm not a policymaker. I like making movies. I wouldn't even call myself a filmmaker. So I'm not going to try to put a bandage on how to fix that. But, there's people out there that should be, able to come up with plans to deal with this. It's not unique here. Other states started seeing these earthquakes, and they had responsible legislatures, and they axed that and decided to ship a lot of that water here to pump down, quite honestly. So, yeah, and we just accepted it.
Reparations would be one way to do it, and why are we expecting an insurance industry to pay for the damages of another industry? So that's one of the problems we see, and they're not paying up. Farmers paid for the one friend of mine's home a long time ago. But now Farmers is denying all the people in Edmond that had serious damage. Plus, why should I have to have a savings account of $10,000 to $20,000 for when the big one hits my home? Because most of this damage, our earthquake insurance is for catastrophic. So many people continue to try to ask the state there should be a fund made so that the people that have severe damages, but they have to admit to the damages, and that's one of the problems we have right now. We're not wanting to admit to the damages and have it assessed and allow people some kind of reparations for it. So that's one of the things I would highly recommend. The other thing I wanted to add, so you heard Dakota discuss the distance. So Stillwater City Limits, Stillwater City Council, went to the table, started off with 1,800 to 2,000 setbacks in the first beginning of this discussion that lasted almost 7 months. We now have a setback in Stillwater of 660 feet, and they're drilling all around the city as we speak.
The other thing to think about with the piece about dropping the amount that we're injecting, the rates that we're injecting at, the high pressures that we're injecting at, whether or not that's going to help the situation. I think you heard, what's his name, Austin Holland, that's his name. You heard Austin Holland talking about these probability rates. So we have I can't remember the name of the guy who came up with the law, but there's a mathematical law for when you have a 6.0 or a 7.0, they can often go back in time and look at the seismographs for the several months or maybe a year before that 6 point or 7 point hit. And they often see 104 points rather than 6 points. So one of the things to think about is we've already got a backlog of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of threes. So just because we drop the high pressure, we drop the rates of injection, that doesn't mean that 6 months from now we might not have a 5 or a 6 or a 7. So it's a problem that we can start to solve now, but we're not actually necessarily going to be out in the woods for 6 months, a year, maybe a couple of years, because what we've done is we've sped up geological time. They don't have a mathematical law that says, well, if you had a 5.5 that's a man-made injection-induced earthquake, this is how many threes should let you know that 5.5 is coming, right? So there's some uncertainty about how to talk about those kinds of probabilities, and that's something to be thinking about as well.
I'm with Political Woodstock Media. I have a question. I've had friends try to get the earthquake insurance, and this is what I hear, that I can't get it because there has to be 30 days without an earthquake. And that doesn't happen in Oklahoma anymore. 95 days.
Areas. There's rarely 3 days. If you go to Cherokee, you go to Granddad's Porch B&B, great place. You stay there for 3 days, you're going to feel an earthquake. Might be a small one. You could be in the middle of the night, but you're going to feel it. That was the most surprising thing, was just how frequent we felt them up in northern Oklahoma while filming this.
And Commissioner Doak, with our insurance commissioner, is going to have a hearing on the insurance. I don't know how well and effective it will be, but people need to be really attentive because they have to solve that problem. There is supposedly some companies saying there won't be a moratorium on date to get the insurance. So I'm hoping that the hearing, I believe it is going to be May 24th,
All right.
will be something that will come out of that to help people who weren't able to get the insurance. The other problem is, how are they going to solve the people like Jackie in Coyle, Oklahoma, whose home has so much damage they don't even know that they can repair it? So what do you do for somebody like that? So I'm hoping that issue continues to move forward. One of the other things, as Dakota was talking, we have now activated old faults. So old faults in Edmond and Cushing are activated, which means our risk continues for a lot longer time. And so those are things to understand why. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, it's tamed down some, and it has. But what happens when the price goes up, or they don't know how to manage the amount of produced water that will come back when they start producing at a regular level? Those are things that we're going to have to be looking at and trying to figure out how to solve as a state, because it's going to impact the whole state economically. Obviously, it's impacting us now because they gave the boom away.
I can't remember, is how much loopholes still in effect that exempts frackers from Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act.
That's right.
I mean,
Being still informed, and the IOCC is one of the main organizations